the lawyers that tried them. I had the incredible task of picking some of yours because we just don't have time to go through all of them. So what I did was I chose 3 from different decades. So I did the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. In the 70s, I thought we'd go through the Deep Throat case.
Sure.
In the 80s, I thought we would go through the Von Bulow case. And in the 90s, I thought we'd go through Mike Tyson with a little bit of OJ.
Okay, that sounds great. Those are kind of representative. Yeah.
Yes.
So the case involving Harry Reams was really interesting because he was the first actor in history ever to be charged with participating in the making of an obscene film. He was a Jewish kid from Westchester, New York. Herbie Stryker studied at NYU, worked at the La Mama stage, and originally was a lighting technician or gaffer on the film Deep Throat. And when the male star didn't show up, he was basically asked to take over. I think he was paid $100 or $150, no residuals. And then he was charged as part of the conspiracy, the ongoing conspiracy. He had nothing to do with it. He had nothing to do with distributing the film. He had nothing to do with deciding whether it would be taken across state lines. But they indicted him and convicted him on a conspiracy in Memphis, Tennessee, where the jury certainly was not representative of those who would watch the film Deep Throat. And the Supreme Court had set out community standards, and community standards depended on which community you were in. So by selecting Memphis, they picked the buckle of the Bible Belt, as it was called,
Sure.
and assured themselves a conviction. But fortunately, we were able to get it reversed on appeal. Harry Reams never spent a day in jail. I went all over the country with him. I did the case pro bono without fee, but we tried to raise expenses for him around the country. And we had famous actors and famous film and other people who were supporting him. Our motto was, today Harry Reams, tomorrow Helen Hayes. Well, a little overstated, but it got us a lot of attention and, raised a few $1,000s for the expenses that he had. And, there were always expenses in trying to bring a case to the Supreme Court,
Right.
where we eventually won.
And you were coming right off the heels of the I'm Curious Yellow case, which you argued before the United States Supreme Court.
Right.
You say it put you at the center of the porn industry, or somewhat of a celebrity in the porn industry, right? But not acting necessarily, but you were definitely relevant in the industry. I'm sure that's how Mr. Reams got to you. When you first is that how he got to you?
Yeah. In fact, the opponents of obscenity or pornography labeled me a pornocrat. Of course, I didn't make it. I didn't make any money, and indeed, I never saw the film. To this day, I haven't seen the film Deep Throat. I refused to see it because I wanted to be able to argue to juries and judges, look, this is not about the content of this film. This is about choice. A woman has the right to choose, and men who want to see films have the right to choose. No government can make you watch a film or can tell you not to watch a film. As long as nobody is forced to watch it, somebody who would be offended by it, it's really none of anybody's business what's inside of a movie theater. And that's why I refused to watch the film. In fact, a judge at one point said, now we're going to show the film to see if it's obscene. And I said, Your Honor, with the permission of the court, I'd like to leave. I don't want to see this film. And the judge said, boy, I'm earning my living today. I have to watch this miserable film. And it was a terrible movie. Everybody tells me it was an impossible movie. I actually saw a few moments of it a few years ago when there was an anniversary celebration of the case, and I had to debate Catherine McKinnon. And as part of the show, they showed about a minute of it, not any of the pornographic parts. It looked absolutely horrible, not the kind of movie I would want to go to see.
I'm sure the quality of film in porn and in general is a lot better now. But I think I had seen an interview where you said it was maybe the most watched television or movie program on a Navy ship at the time. Right. Yeah, so I think that was a position you took that had some redeeming value. Tell us about that a little bit.
Well, it turned out that on our nuclear sub, it was the most popular film. You can imagine a bunch of men alone in the submarine underground. In those days, they did not have gender-mixed sub crews. And so, yeah, it was watched quite often. And we also mentioned the name of some celebrities who had said they had watched it, and a few people who said it improved their sex lives. Who knows what impact it has. One thing that's clear is that movies like Deep Throat have no impact on causing rape or causing violence against women. There's just no evidence to support that at all.
In fact, you said the opposite is true.
The opposite.
Right.
Just the opposite. That in countries that have total bans on all kinds of pornography, rates of sexual assault are quite high. And in more liberal states like New York and others, California, the rates are considerably lower. Nobody can ever be sure, but there's just no basis for censoring a movie like Deep Throat or any other movie which is watched in the privacy of one's home or the privacy of a movie theater. Remember, they used to have movie theaters that showed porn movies.
Sure.
Today, you get them on your iPhone, so there's no issue of offending the public.
Actually, you bring that up with the iPhone. There's probably no time in history that porn's been more available than it is now. Frankly, it's exploded in mainstream culture with sex tapes and everything else. Do you feel that the war that you fought in the 70s during that revolution time for porn paved the way for where it is now? Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I didn't fight the war for porn. I fought the war for freedom of speech, freedom of expression, without regard to the content. What I was worried about is giving the government a regime of censorship, where today they could censor a porn film, tomorrow they could censor a politically sensitive. Remember, the film I Am Curious Yellow was predominantly a political film, an anti-Vietnam War film, which had a little bit of sex in it. And we don't know what the justification was. I also represented the play Hair. Remember that? And in that case, clearly the play was 90% political. There was one brief scene of nudity, and that got it banned, and we had to take that case all the way up to the Supreme Court. And we won in a close case. It was 6-3, but Hair went on. It's the only case I ever wanted to sing a song in front of the judges. How dare they ban our music? That comes from Hair. And it was a perfect song to sing to try to win the case. I didn't do it.
Yeah. Well,
although I did tell a joke in the federal court when I was arguing I Am Curious Yellow. I told a joke. One of the judges, Judge Bailey Aldridge, who was a kind of stuffy old Brahmin, said, but my aunt once walked into a movie theater thinking it was a travelogue, and she was deeply offended when she saw it was a sex film. How do you make sure it's not advertised in a provocative way? And I said, you know, there was this Jewish guy walking around in Eastern Europe in a small town, and his watch broke. And he went to a store that had watches and clocks in the window. And he said, mister, can you fix my watch? And the man said, fix your watch? I don't fix watches. I'm a moil. I perform circumcisions, brisses. The guy says, you perform circumcisions? Why do you have clocks and watches in the window? The man said, what do you want I should put in the window? So that was, I got a laugh out of Bailey Aldridge. And he later told me that that joke had an influence on him writing a decision in our favor. So sometimes humor can prevail.
Oh, wow, that's great. So the reason that, or the main reason that you won the appeal in the Deep Throat case is because when he was charged, Mr. Reams, the law actually changed subsequent to when he was charged, or when the act occurred. The law changed. The Miller decision came down, changed the standard. You won that appeal. They never retried him, right?
Never retried him. In fact, one of the heroes of the case, of all people, was Robert Bork, who was then the Solicitor General of the United States. And he ultimately confessed error. He accepted our position on the change of the law and confessed error. And I suspect he may have persuaded the Justice Department that it would be a mistake to try to bring a new trial, because we were really geared up. We were ready to fight. And, you know, the first time around it was local lawyers. But by the time it got up to the Supreme Court, you know, we had national lawyers involved, and we were going to battle them all the way. So they never prosecuted the case. And, you know, Harry Reams moved to Park City, Utah, where he skied until the end of his life and lived a relatively decent life. He became a born-again Christian, but he never would oppose obscenity, unlike Linda Lovelace and some of the others who became campaigners against it. He said, I will not sit in judgment about my past conduct or about my friends in the pornography industry. So he was a very, very interesting man. I really enjoyed being with him.
What happened to the other 11 people who were charged? Did they ultimately...
All dropped. All dropped. Were dropped. Nobody was prosecuted at all. They had a decent case against, you know, some of the people who transported the film in interstate commerce, but they had no case really against Harry Reams, who had just made the film and had no stake in the future of the film. He didn't have a percentage. He didn't have anything. He didn't make anything beyond his $100 or $150 that he made for that one day of work.
Interesting. I was when I was doing a little research to try to get prepared for this interview, I watched an interview with William Buckley, where he kept on going. Yeah, he kept on going back to the question. Well, if you want to be able to watch porn in your own house, and you say that you should be able to do whatever you want to do in your own house, that's fine. He kept going back. Well, should you be able to do heroin in your own house? Is that really, is that a fair comparison? You didn't find it to be something. It wasn't relevant. Now, heroin is an epidemic now.
Sure.
How do you feel about it?
Well, first, I love Bill Buckley. We used to have great debates. I was on his show many times. He called me his favorite liberal. He was my favorite conservative. We really had good, serious debates. He came up to Harvard. We had a debate there. No, I think he was dead wrong about heroin. Heroin kills. Heroin maims. Heroin causes people to go out and rob. Nobody has ever robbed a store in order to get a ticket to a porn movie. So I don't think that one can talk about pornography as being criminogenic, causing crime. I do think that heroin causes crime. So I don't think his analogies worked at all. But he certainly stuck with that analogy in all of our debates.
Yeah, it seemed to be repeated. I was just curious how you felt about it now. But one other thing I thought was interesting in your book, which is Taking the Stand. I've read it a couple times. I have it here. You described the first time that you met Harry Reams. You were expecting this big, strapping 6'4" stud, and what you got was somebody you could have mistaken for one of your Harvard students. What was that like?
Not only that, when I met him, he looked at me, I looked at him. He had a stereotype of a Harvard professor. I had a stereotype of a porn star. And we stood there for a few minutes, not thinking. And then we decided to use that as a trick. We were on a show, a television show. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. It was out of California. It was a national show late at night. And we were in the green room, the two of us together. And Harry always wore a three-piece suit. And I was, wearing a sport jacket or something. And in those days, I was, thin and I had a mustache and slightly better looking than I am now.
And a lot of hair, big hair.
Right. And the producer, a young woman came out, the producer, and turned to me and said, "Mr. Reams, are you ready for makeup?" And I got confused. And we both got an enormous kick out of him being confused for a Harvard law professor and me being confused for a porn star. It's never happened again since.
I find that hard to believe. All right, let's change gears to the second case. This is the Claus Von Bulow case, famously made into a major motion picture based on your book. Actually, before we go into the case, why didn't you play yourself? I wonder that as I watch the movie with my wife.
Ron Silver is a great actor. I had a bit part in a couple of TV shows, and everybody was unanimous in saying I should keep my day job. So my daughter is a professional actor. Yes. She's been in about 10 off-Broadway plays, gotten terrific reviews, was recently in a play about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Heming in Mill Valley, California. So there's one actor in the family, that's enough. And my other son is a film producer. He helped produce Reversal of Fortune. And, it was a pleasure to work with Jeremy Irons, who won the Oscar for his performance. And Ron Silver, who tragically died at a young age, was just a terrific guy. And he came and watched me teach. He watched me argue. He really got into my personality. By the end of the time he was doing it, I mean, he really was me. He had all the gestures down pat. And my kids were amazed that he could do such a great imitation of me.
Your daughter did a great job with the audiobook of Taking the Stand, by the way.
Thank you. I'll tell her. I appreciate that.
All right, so let's talk about Claus Von Bulow. He's found guilty at trial for the attempted murder of his wife, specifically by injecting her with insulin. She ended up in a coma for like 20 years, I think. You get the case on appeal. How did you get into the case? I think he's out on bail. How did he get a hold of you? What was it like?
Well, I got recommended to do the case by Abe Fortas, the former justice of the Supreme Court. What happened is Von Bulow wanted to get Fortas, a former Supreme Court justice, to argue the case, and Fortas said, "No, I'm retired, but you should get Dershowitz. He's a good appellate lawyer." And so he got me. In the movie, his girlfriend says, "Get the Jew," but I'm not sure. I don't know whether that was true or not. But he got the Jew, and I argued the case. And, we won the case on science, pure science. That was my specialty, teaching. I was the law and professor. Everything I taught for 50 years was law and science, law and psychology, law and literature. I even taught a course on law and baseball, law and the Bible. Every course I taught had an and next to it. And law and science was really, I taught law and mathematics. I loved looking at issues from a scientific point of view. And we proved scientifically beyond any doubt that no crime had been committed. It wasn't that he didn't do it, there was no crime. She had gone into a coma as the result of self-ingestion of barbiturates. She had reactive hypoglycemia and was a sugar addict. And the night she went into the coma, she overloaded both on barbiturates and on tremendous amount of cream and Christmas nog and eggnog and all of that, and that put her in. She was twice in comas around Christmas time, right. And that was no coincidence. And ultimately, this last coma she stayed in and died 20 or 25 years later, which would have, by the way, opened him up to be charged with murder. Being found not guilty of attempted murder doesn't mean you can't be tried, at least in some states, for murder if the person dies, but they never brought a prosecution.
No statute of limitations.
No statute of limitations, yeah, but they didn't bring the prosecution. It would have had to be either in Newport or in New York, probably in New York, because that's where she died.
Interesting. So famously from your movie and your book, you worked in conjunction with your students in preparing the case. My wife is a big fan of this television show. What is it called again?
Murder something?
How to Get Away with Murder.
Yeah,
so my wife Michelle, we were watching the movie, and she says, this is just like Gotta Get Away with Murder. My wife Michelle says that, and I say, I wonder if Professor Dershowitz is getting any royalties because it's a direct rip-off of his movie and his book.
Not at all. But I did put together a team of students, and I had some incredibly great students. I had Elliot Spitzer, worked as my research assistant. Jim Kramer worked as my research assistant. A guy named Mark Fabiani, a guy named Cliff Sloan. I had some of the best students. I also had a couple of professors as part of my team, young professors, Susan Estridge, and some others. And we really had a first-rate team. It was an overwhelmingly complex case. Yeah. We divided our legal team into basketball teams, and we would play 3-on-3 basketball in my backyard. When we were working on the case, we had the insulin needle team, the black bag team, I was a pretty good ball player as a kid. I played basketball in high school, and I played in Madison Square Garden once, mostly sitting on the bench. But the guy on the other team, who was the opposite of me, was a guy named Ralphie Lipschitz, who changed his name later to Ralph Lauren. And so Ralph Lauren and I played Madison Square Garden 1954 against each other. They won, we lost. Lauren wasn't a great ball player, but he really dressed well.
Yeah, he figured it out, huh? Actually, while we're on basketball, Brooklyn's got a team. Are you still a Celtics guy, or are you coming home?
Oh, no, I'm not coming home. No, too late. I'm a Celtics guy. They're very close to Red Auerbach. We sat together for years and years and years. I literally sat at his feet and watched basketball games with him commenting and screaming at the refs, playing the refs. And, he introduced me to everybody, to Larry Bird. He introduced me to Bob Cousy. So, of course, I'm a Celtic for life. I'm a Red Sox for life. New England Patriots, a little hard these days, because there's so many allegations against them. But I'm a Pats fan. But my second favorite teams are all the New York teams. I love watching the Yankees. I love watching the Nets. Not so much the New York Knicks, which I of course always rooted for. And I also root for the Bruins. I'm a big sports fan. My son runs the Women's National Basketball Association as its general counsel. One of the people who runs it. And my niece was chief counsel for the U.S. Olympic Committee and now is chief counsel for the Aspen Ski Corporation. So we're a big sports family. I own a ring that may have been worn, we think, by Jackie Robinson in his rookie year in 1947. It's the National League Championship Brooklyn Dodger ring that was given to all the players. That year they won the pennant, but they lost the World Series, as usual, to the New York Yankees. And I own that ring, and it's one of my great treasures.
That's great. Well, what makes you think that it's Jackie Robinson's? Is there a number on it?
We were told. There's a whole story. It's very complicated, but we think it was, but we can't be sure.
Pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
The decision comes down in the Van Bulow case. They order a new trial. You didn't try the trial. Why didn't you try it?
Well, I'm not a trial lawyer. I was a professor. And so, to be a trial lawyer, you have to have 3 weeks in a row, 4 weeks in a row where you can, I think the case took almost a month. So I was teaching, but I oversaw a lot of the trial. My science team was there every day. And it was tried by another lawyer in New York, and the jury acquitted very, very quickly based on the science that we had developed in the appeal.
Yeah, so you planted the seeds. Now, that's interesting. You same type of thing with the OJ case. You were there. In my opinion, I've never even heard of an appellate lawyer literally being on board for the entire trial to preserve those issues, really, right?
I tell that to all my clients. The earlier you get me into a case, the better I'm going to be able to serve your interests. I can help prepare motions, obviously, but mostly I'm framing all the issues for appeal. I'm immediately looking at the distance. I'm not only looking at appellate issues, I'm looking for cert-worthy issues if it eventually gets to the Supreme Court. Not everybody can afford to have a lawyer who is a specialist in appeals and habeas corpus sit through the trial, or at least be available to consult with the trial lawyers. But if anybody can afford to do it, I think it's a wise thing to do, not only for me, but generally, if you're in trouble, I think having an appellate lawyer looking at the case and making sure that all the issues are preserved. There's nothing more frustrating for an appellate lawyer than getting a transcript of the case and saying, oh my God, there's a reversible error right there, and they didn't raise it, they didn't preserve it. How could they have missed that issue? You tear your hair out when that happens. I'm in a case right now where that happened.
Interesting. What lesson do you take away from the Van Bulow case, if you can give one to the younger legal minds out there?
No science. No science. The same thing with the OJ case. No science. Understand DNA. Understand what false positives mean. Understand how labs work. Understand how you can use science not only as a shield but as a sword. So if you're going to be a criminal lawyer, you really have to have a basis in science. I tell young pre-law students, if they're going to go to law school and want to be a criminal lawyer, take some basic science courses, a basic chemistry course, any course that teaches you the scientific method, gives you an ability to read scientific documents and materials. You should never just assume that experts are correct. They maybe believe they're correct, but they often make very serious mistakes that you can exploit both at trial and on appeal.
That's great advice. I think it's true for medicine and personal injury and those different areas of law as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's switch gears. We'll go to our last case, which is the Mike Tyson case. That's around 1993. In that case, I read the opinion of the appeal, which was basically, in my opinion, felt like one big punt. That issue wasn't preserved. That issue wasn't preserved. It felt like a big punt. I don't know if that's how it felt to you, but
a very famous lawyer from the Williams and Connolly firm. And it was a tragedy. I think Mike Tyson was factually innocent. I believe he was factually innocent. There was certainly a reasonable doubt. And they excluded witnesses, 3 witnesses or 4 witnesses, I don't remember, who actually saw them going into the hotel, holding hands, she snuggling up to him. She testified under oath that she pushed him away. She had no interest in him. She had no romantic interest. Why was she going to his hotel room at 3 in the morning? She didn't fully explain. She got on top of him during the sex act. She was in the bathroom. She could have locked the door. She had access to a phone in the bathroom. And almost all of that was excluded by the judge. The judge herself was a former rape prosecutor. She did not believe there was such a thing as a man who could be innocent of rape. If you're charged, you're guilty. And it was just terrible. And the case was decided on a 2-2 vote ultimately. 2 votes for review by the Supreme Court, 2 votes against it, with the Chief Justice recusing himself on the phoniest possible argument. The Chief Justice sent his wife over to talk to me at a Yale reunion in order to engineer a recusal from the case, because he himself, the Chief Justice, had been charged with sexual abuse, but today he'd be one of these guys, one of these Me Too guys. So he didn't want that to be raised. And as a result, he didn't want to be involved in the case. His prior opinions all favored us. So if he had stayed in the case, it would have been 3-2 in our favor.
Wow,
it's
that's
an
incredible
case. I still live with it. I think it's the worst defeat I suffered professionally as a lawyer. And, you know, I see Mike Tyson every so often. He now performs in Las Vegas. He does a great show. If you're ever in Las Vegas, I think it's in the MGM, go to see his show. It's really, really worthwhile. He talks a little bit about the case, but mostly he talks about his life. But he was, I firmly believe he was innocent.
Wow. Yeah, in your book, you detail it pretty well in the Taking the Stand that there was the rape shield kind of culture and the way it was applied in the courtroom. It heavily affected that case. In fact, the victim was a beauty pageant contestant. They presented her during the trial as this virgin, holier than now, never going to have sex until she gets married type of individual. And in reality, that was far from the truth. That was kept out of the trial.
Yeah, she had sex with the quarterback in her football team, and her father had beaten the hell out of her when he found out about it. And her father said, you have to say that he raped you, and she said no, and the whole thing was very complicated. And we believe, this is just our belief, our opinion, we believe that she said she was raped by Mike Tyson because her father was coming to town. And everybody knew she had slept with Mike Tyson, so he would hear that, and she was afraid she'd get beaten up again. So she, you know, told the story she told. She told a very different story when she was taken to the hospital and when she spoke to other people. But none of that was fully admitted at the trial, and the jury only heard part of it. We then interviewed several of the jurors, and they said if they had heard those 4 witnesses, they would have come to a different verdict. But, you know, that's Monday morning quarterbacking. So Mike Tyson went to jail, and he had some very hard time in the Indiana Youth Correctional Facility. They bullied him. They put him in chains. They provoked him. They wanted him to hit a guard because they wanted him to stay longer, but he wouldn't do it. And he got out after a few years and has lived a decent life. But, you know, it ruined the career of one of the greatest boxers in history.
Yeah, it sure did. When you first met Mike Tyson, this is a fun story. You met him in a hotel room. He had all his crew with him. And he tell us about what happened there.
Oh, it's a funny story. So Don King asked me to come to meet him the night before he was going to go to jail because I hadn't been involved in the trial at all. This was the night before he was going to get sentenced, and we knew he was going to be sent away immediately, that they would deny bail for no good reason, but they were going to deny bail. So I get to the room, and there he is, and he says to me, all right, Alan, I have 2 questions for you. One, do you think I'm innocent? And I said, Mike, I can't tell you that. I, you know, read the transcript. I wasn't there. I hadn't really read most of the transcript at that point. I said, I hope you're innocent, but I'm going to defend you as strongly regardless. All right, I understand. That's legal talk. Tell me, what do you think of me as a person? I said, you really want to know? He said, yeah. I said, Mike, and I looked him right in the eye, Mike, you're a schmuck. He said, you calling me a schmuck? I said, I'm calling you a schmuck. Go into a hotel room with a woman you didn't know at 3 in the morning without having one of your people there to observe, just to make sure that there was nothing going on, allowed you to be set up. He turned to his friends and said, this man called me a schmuck. He said, I want him to be my lawyer. You guys should have called me a schmuck. That's your job. I'm glad he talked to me that way. He's a straight shooter. I want him to be my lawyer. That's an interesting story. Sounds like I was a little concerned when I looked him in the eye and called him a schmuck that maybe respond a little differently. I would have broken the record for being knocked out in less than 2 seconds. Right?
Just 2 guys from Brooklyn, right? That's it.
Oh, yeah. He came from a different section of Brooklyn, a tougher section. But we love to talk about Brooklyn together.
That case, Mike Tyson ended up going to jail. You said about 95% of cases, criminal cases, lose, right? And on appeal, even more than that.
Yeah, it's about 97, 98% lose on appeal. Yeah.
Not necessarily your record, but that's a tough record.
Believe me, that's my record. I have a much, much better record than that because I can be more selective, first of all, in my cases. And, you know, I've won lots and lots of appeals, and I've had a very, fortunate record. I work very, very hard, and I never give up. And even if I lose, I try to get a commutation. I got a commutation last week from President Trump of a man named Rubashkin, who was sentenced to 20-something years in prison for a relatively minor bank fraud. And we persuaded President Trump, who I did not vote for, to grant a commutation. And he did. So, I never give up. I never give up until the client's dead or I'm dead, one of us. But, a lawyer can't give up. And I keep, some lawyers don't like this. I keep representing my clients even if they run out of money. Mike Tyson ran out of money. Many of my clients have run out of money. I do half of my cases pro bono without fee. But even the ones that I take a fee, if the guy runs out of money, I'm not going to abandon him. I'm not going to leave him in a lurch. That's my responsibility.
You have a pretty strong relationship with the Clintons. You have there's one story that you tell when you're on at a party on Martha's Vineyard with them, where you were being critical of Bill Clinton's decision on his lawyer and how the lawyer addressed his civil deposition. Had he defaulted on that case and paid the money, he would never have been deposed, and then everybody would have been none the wiser about his personal life, could have avoided a major chapter in American history.
Right.
Yeah. So how did that go exactly?
Well, I said to him, you know, you made a terrible mistake. Your lawyer could have easily resolved this case. The other side didn't want to settle, but under D.C. law, you could have just brought $750,000, I think, something like that, deposited it with the clerk of court, the case would be over and dismissed, and there'd be no deposition. And he said, well, my lawyer never told me that. And so I called the lawyer the next day on the phone, and I said, is it true that you didn't tell the president that he had that option? He said, of course I didn't tell him. It would have been a terrible idea. I said, but he's a lawyer. He's the president. Don't you think he gets to make that decision? And shortly thereafter, the president fired the lawyer. And I think he has now come to realize, I actually wrote an article a few years ago for George magazine, that was John F. Kennedy Jr.'s magazine before he was killed in the plane crash. And it was the 10 greatest legal blunders of the 20th century. I wrote it in 2000. And number one legal blunder was Clinton's lawyer allowing him to be deposed about his sex life. It's just unbelievable that any lawyer would allow that to happen.
Was number two Durden's decision to have O.J. try the glove on? It had to be in the top 10.
Yeah, no, that was very, very high. Very, very high, especially since under California law, you could have made him try it on outside the presence of the jury, and only if you saw that it fit, then have him do it in front of the jury. But Darden just didn't do that. I don't know whether he didn't know California law or he just was arrogant, but I was in the courtroom that day. I was sitting literally 2-3 feet away from O.J. when he walked over to the jury, and he said, it's too small. And at that point, he testified. Right. So he didn't have to subject to cross-examination. So it was a great, great legal blunder. We didn't win the O.J. case. They lost it.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it goes back to the old saying, you don't ask a question you don't know the answer to, times 1,000 in that situation.
You don't put a glove on a guy if you don't know if it's going to fit or not. Yeah. And that became the mantra. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Right. Although when we walked out of the courtroom after that was happening, there were people with signs to the jury, if you acquit, you're full of, okay.
That's funny. So in the O.J. case, you were on as, quote, the God forbid lawyer. Is that right?
Right, yeah. I was going to be the appellate lawyer. I told him, by the way, I thought if he lost at trial, the chances of winning on appeal were pretty slight, because they would find everything harmless error. They would say, oh, the evidence was so overwhelming that no evidence would have ever changed the jury's verdict in this case. It was predestined from day one the jury was going to convict. Of course, the jury didn't convict. But appellate judges are not in a good position to analyze whether errors are harmless. Most appellate judges have no experience trying criminal cases. They have no idea of the dynamics of a trial. And the idea that they can determine whether an error is harmless is such judicial arrogance. That's one of my pet peeves.
Sure. So in the O.J. case, again, science was a big part of the defense that you put forward. In fact, the glove not fitting, sure, it's the one that probably most of America knows about. But really, the sock, the blood on the sock, that was it. The sock
was the thing that won the case. And I was responsible for the sock, so I take great pleasure in describing that. What happened is they found the sock with the blood of O.J. and the blood of the victim. And it looked like the best piece of evidence possible, except there were 3 problems. One, they claimed they found it on the white rug in front of his bed. And they didn't realize that before the police came claiming to find it on the white rug, a videographer had come and there was no glove. There was no socks on the white rug. Number 2, the blood in the sock and no other blood in the case had EDTA, which is an anticoagulant not found in the human body, but found in test tubes that are used to store blood to make sure it doesn't coagulate. So what we argued and proved was that Officer Van Adder took the blood home with him, and that was clear from the record, and poured the blood on the sock to create a piece of evidence because he thought the glove would be excluded. And then the most important part is that the sock had mirror images on all four sides, the same blood splatter on the first side, the second side, the third, and the fourth side. And if it had been worn when the blood splattered, it would have only mirror images on the first side and the inside, but not on the third and fourth side. So the fact that it had four mirror images proved that the blood was administered to the sock while it was lying flat. Every one of the 12 jurors believed that. And they had different reactions. Some said, if the police could tamper with one piece of evidence, who knows, maybe they could tamper with other pieces of evidence, so reasonable doubt. Some of them said, we don't think there's reasonable doubt, but damn it, we're not going to let the police win a case after they tampered with the evidence. So, that blew the case for them out of the water. I'm sure they've done that before, and they had gotten away with it. And they didn't get away with it this time because we had, again, a good scientific team, and we were able to analyze the blood splatter in a way that a lawyer without experience wouldn't have known to do.
An incredible discovery, classic example of false in one, false in all, I think.
Yeah.
So we had F. Lee Bailey on the show. He was our first guest. He had incredible things to say about you. I want to just read to you what he said when I mentioned that you were our next guest. He said, speaking about Professor Dershowitz, I love him. I always have. He's one of the best lawyers God ever created and the smartest, I think. Alan and I will write forwards to each other's books. Do you still keep in touch with Lee?
I do. I think he got really screwed by the main legal system in a very closely divided vote. They not only disbarred him, but they wouldn't let him back into the bar. Lee was the best cross-examiner I've ever seen anywhere in any court. He really developed the art of cross-examination. He knew that you don't win cross-examination in the courtroom. You win it based on the research you do before the courtroom. Every question he asked, it didn't matter what the answer was. It was going to be a damning answer one way or the other. And he had an enormous style in the courtroom. He was brilliant. I first met him when he was a young lawyer. I was a young assistant professor. I met him through his brother, who was in my class in criminal law. And he got me involved early on in the Boston Strangler case and some of the other cases, the Patricia Hearst case. And we worked fairly closely together. I did appellate briefs for him, and he did the trial work. And it's such a tragedy that he is now not practicing law. He's probably now around 85. And he's just one of the great lawyers in American history.
Yeah, he was a great interview, and he was very complimentary about you. So I wanted to tell you.
Yeah, thank you. I feel the same about him. Yeah.
All right, great. Professor Dershowitz, the last part of our show is called Taking the Fifth. I ask the same 5 questions to everybody. It's your turn. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. First off, in your career, what single case are you most proud of and why?
Natan Sharansky, the Soviet dissident, who there but for the grace of God go I. I could have been a Soviet dissident if my parents hadn't come to America in 1889, and I had to use diplomacy, economics, politics, law to help get him out of prison with Erwin Kotler, the two of us. And when he got out of prison, we did it free pro bono, and he whispered in my ear the Hebrew prayer, blessed are those who free the imprisoned. Biggest fee I ever got in a case, just having that whispered to my ear.
Where can we find out more about that? Because I don't know much about that case at all.
He was a Soviet dissident, a refusenik. He's now, then when he got out of prison, he went to Israel, and he's now a very high-level politician and moral leader in Israel. Great man.
Very interesting. Number 2, if you could handle a case with one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh, very simple. Jesus. I wanted to represent Jesus on First Amendment ground, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. Imagine how different the world would be if a Jewish lawyer got Jesus acquitted. So that would be
All right, the next question is one book and one movie that has inspired you.
Well, you know, Ed Bennett Williams' book, One Man's Freedom, I read when I was in law school. It had a big effect on me. I think probably the Nuremberg movie, Judgment at Nuremberg, had a big impact on me as well. I eventually became a mentee and worked with Telford Taylor, who was the real prosecutor in the case, so it had a big impact on me.
Interesting. The last 2 are fill-in-the-blank questions. Okay, the first one is, a trial lawyer should never do this.
Never cross-examine unless you know that you can get a significant benefit from the cross-examination. I think a lot of lawyers lose ground when they cross-examine because they think the client won't think they're doing their job if they don't cross-examine. So use cross-examination sparsely, only if you think you can advance the ball. Remember that when the witness answers the same question for you that they answered for the other side, it's much worse because they're answering it for you. And so it's not neutral if you get the same answer. If he repeats it under your questioning, it sets you back.
Interesting. And the last question is, a trial lawyer should do this every day.
A trial lawyer should know the record of his case, know the facts of his case every day. Also, a trial lawyer should stay in shape. You have to be physically fit to be a trial lawyer. A friend of mine almost wrote a book about exercises to be done in the courtroom during breaks. Very important to be fit when you're trying a case, when you're appealing a case. It takes a lot of physical energy. Be always mentally acute. Get a very good night's sleep the night before the argument. I did that when I was a test taker. I was very good at test taker in school. I always went to sleep at 9:30 after a glass of warm milk. I never studied late into the night. Better to be wide awake than even not read the last article that you might otherwise read. So be very, very much awake. And practice your profession with passion. You have to wake up every day saying, I can't wait to get to work. I can't wait to see what injustices I can help undo. I'm not suggesting that you never say, thank God it's Friday, and always say at the end of the weekend, thank God it's Monday. You need to have balance in your life. But wanting to really get there and do the job is such an important motivation.
Can you keep that drive when you have a criminal defense lawyer who's losing 95% of the time? How do you keep that drive?
You got to. 95%, you try to make it 90%. You're not, look, it's like being a cancer surgeon who specializes in pancreatic cancer. You're going to lose, 90% of your cases. But if you can make the difference in a few, that makes all the difference in the world. And, you have to be lucky. I think so far I've been lucky. I'm 79 years old, and I have more energy than I had when I was 29 years old. So I've been blessed with a high level of energy and determination, and I hope I continue to be able to do that. I don't know how long I'll be able to continue to keep up the energy level I now have, but right now it's pretty high.
So I'll come up to Cambridge and play some 3-on-3 with you.
I don't do 3-on-3 anymore. Now I'm down to horse. But wait, my grandson was a varsity athlete and a phenomenal athlete, lacrosse player, soccer player, you name it, great athlete. I can still beat him in horse because I have that deadly corner jump shot. And I don't get high, I don't get much off the ground, but I can hit it from the corner. And this kid, he can hit it from all over the court, but not from the corner. He needs the backboard, and I don't need the backboard. So I can still win horses. I can win 21. I have kind of given up on 3-on-3. A little bit of 1-on-1. I'll play 1-on-1 with my grandson, but 3-on-3, not anymore. I'm going to watch it now. I'll watch you play. I don't live in Cambridge anymore, though. I divide my time now in New York, Miami Beach, Florida, where I'm a snowbird, and Martha's Vineyard. And it's nice to be able to have those three places.
3 good places to be. Can the Celtics beat the Cavs, or they got no shot?
No, the Celtics can beat the Cavs.
With Gordon Hayward or without Gordon Hayward?
Well, I don't know. I think they can beat them either way. It'll take luck. What I'm concerned about is the Pats and the Eagles. If they get to the Super Bowl, even without the Eagles quarterback, they've been such a phenomenal team this year. And my grandson roots for the Eagles, so we're having a real
family rivalry there.
I know. And my granddaughter roots for the Yankees. What can I tell you? So we have